Welcome to another episode of the Playlist Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Mike D'Angelo, and on this episode, my co-host Brian Farver and I got to sit down with writer-producer Michael Waldron, who wrote on Loki, the upcoming Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Rick and Morty, the upcoming Kevin Feige-produced Star Wars film. So there was a lot to cover, and we got to chat with Michael about all of those projects and somehow even more that he has his hands in, like the upcoming pro wrestling drama Heels that's coming to Stars soon. I'll let you hear every bit of that conversation in a minute, but before we get to our chat, I've got to tell you that the Playlist Podcast is part of the Playlist Podcast Network, which includes Be Real, Deep Focus, Fourth Wall, and more. It can be heard on iTunes, Anchor FM, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and now Spotify. You can go ahead and follow us on iTunes, and you'll get this podcast as well as our other shows regularly. Be sure to subscribe and drop us a comment or a rating, and as always, thank you for listening. Now, without further delay, our chat with the very busy and very talented Michael Waldron. Welcome to the Playlist Podcast to discuss what was probably a pretty uneventful year for you, or maybe 2 years. But either way, I know you're probably not busy at all. So just thanks for stopping by and, whatever.
Glad to be here.
So let's start out by talking about Loki. First of all, have you even been able to sit back and be like, wow, this is doing well, or think about it at all? Or are you just like, I gotta do all this stuff for Doctor Strange or Star Wars or whatever the heck it is?
I guess maybe a little bit of both. It's funny because so much of the show I wrote 2 years ago, in 2019. So it's like, in a lot of ways, you get to kind of watch it as a fan, and be like, oh yeah, we did a good job. And so that's fun. It's been the 6-week process of the show coming out was a really amazing, immersive experience. Just getting, I really enjoyed, listening all the movie and TV show podcasts and websites that I just consume as a fan. Suddenly we're talking about something that I worked on. So it's like, that's just cool. That's the shit that I'd be reading regardless. So it was great. And then I disappeared. I went off on vacation with my wife over the last 2 weeks on a long delayed honeymoon, and kind of went underground a little bit as the finale came out and all that. But it's cool. It seems like it was well received, and I'm glad about that.
Yeah. And since we can talk about spoilers now that the season is out,
yes.
When you jumped on to Loki, did you have the structure of the season laid out already? Did Kate already come in and kind of pitch her version? Were there any mandated points by Marvel? Where was it at when you came in?
It was where it was at was, I guess I first started pitching on it right at the end of 2018, and Marvel, they had, the big idea was Loki and the TVA, which is a big idea. That was the heartbeat of the show. They had already cracked, and they'd really had a lot of great ideas for maybe how that could play out. And then, I came in and I really came in with a strong sort of episodic perspective of just, I want each episode to sort of stand on its own. Here's 6 chapters that this could potentially be, and actually by and large, that's pretty much what the show became. In the writer's room over the first 3 weeks, we said, all right, let's not worry about the time travel shit, because that's gonna kill all of us. We know it's gonna take time to figure out all that. Let's just worry about the emotional thrust of this story. And so we focused on that blueprint over the first 3 weeks, and really laid out the 6 episodes generally in exactly what they became. That it's like episode 2 is kind of the police work episode. Episode 3 is Loki and Sylvie crossing this apocalypse. Episode 4 is the conspiracy comes undone. Episode 5 is in the void. We knew we were going, and then it was like, all right, now the devil's going to be in the details of this thing. That was in the top of 2019, and we worked for kind of a 20 weeks standard writer's room amount of time. And then right around the end of that, as we had good first drafts of everything, that was right around when Kate came on. And it was really excellent timing because she had her own set of amazing ideas for what the show could be, and she also represented fresh eyes, we were all really thick in the soup, and she had a little bit of a outside perspective initially, which was helpful as we moved into the really most important round of revisions on everything.
Were there any big changes that were made when she came on board, or was it still like everybody was on the same page and working towards whittling it down?
I mean, I certainly, there were big changes. It's, she came on at a time when we were all looking at it saying, all right, we got first drafts of everything. What's working, what's not, digging into the dogma of the TVA, the idea that mythology of the timekeepers and everything, really figuring out what is the nature of that conspiracy. The idea that everybody who works there is a variant. I think that was a thing that came as Kate came on board, as we all started our conversations. That obviously was a very, very important, hook of where the show goes.
Kind of touching on some of those characters. I mean, there's a lot of them that made a really big splash, Mobius and Sylvie. And I know a lot of people are talking about Jonathan Majors, He Who Remains, or Kang. And some people are expecting him to be the next big, phase-wide villain like Thanos. And I guess my question is, was this character always a part of the show, or was he a late addition?
No, he was, very early on. It was like, I was gunning for, this should be Kang. Because it's like, it was like, well, who's the man behind the curtain? And in the comics, that's this character of He Who Remains. And as you delve into that, you just, I saw the opportunities, and our whole team saw the opportunities for, that character really probably seems to have a lot in common with Immortus in a way, with that version of Kang, and these mythologies seem to be kind of dovetailing. It just felt like an exciting opportunity to, to make our show that much more important within the MCU. And, we realized, I think, early on that if you're making a time travel show, at least the MCU, you're actually just making a multiverse show. It was like, this is the same thing. What the TVA is doing is not preventing time travel. They're preventing a multiverse. That's, that's what's dangerous. And so, we saw that opportunity to fold that guy in there. And, luckily, as they always are, the powers that be at Marvel were excited about it. And it's just like, if we had a good reason to do something like that, they stood behind it.
Do you think his role in the MCU is going to eventually be Thanos level big, or are people thinking too small right now? Like, what do you think about that?
He's a hell of an actor, hell of a performer. I don't know. Yes. You heard him in the show. Wait till you meet. You think I'm evil? Wait till you meet my variants. So we'll see.
Yeah, awesome. It's one of those things where you have not only just like the opportunity to make, someone Thanos level as far as a villain, but you get to make multiple versions that are all their own things. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. The exciting thing about getting to, I guess, originate that character on the page in the MCU was sort of creating a totally different energy than what Thanos is, which is very measured, principled, almost monk-like in his evil aspirations. And obviously, He Who Remains, it's a much more squirrely, chaotic, narcissistic presence. And so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, kind of focusing on characters, like you really had the chance to introduce a lot of different Loki characters to the MCU, and a lot of them were huge hits. Do you know if there's plans to see any of them again? We're referring to specifically a personal favorite of ours, classic Loki, Richard E. Grant.
Not talking about alligator Loki. Wow.
Well, he's a close second.
The cool thing about look, the Void is still out there. Those characters are the characters that survived are still out there. Obviously, in a vast multiverse, you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the best you could hope for an answer there, Brian.
Yeah.
When you were in the writing phase for this and Doctor Strange, did you see the multiverse as like this opportunity to go anywhere, or did you you're like, well, this could get really convoluted and confusing? How did you have to map it out? Did you have to make all the rules, or you're just kind of figuring it out as you go?
I mean, I guess a little bit of both. I think that, you have to tread carefully. Anytime the story story is expanding outward in such a big way, you want to make sure that you're not alienating audiences, that you're not robbing the overall story of stakes, that it becomes so big and unwieldy that people don't quite know what they're supposed to care about. And so what I was always focused on Loki and on Doctor Strange was just, regardless of the crazy stuff that's happening, what's the emotional core of this story? How do you keep the humanity of it? That's what's great about the Marvel comics, and I think that's where the MCU excels as well. And so, however crazily we branch out, and whether it's a multiverse, whether it's into space, whatever it is, I think you just got to keep finding that core relatability. That's what'll make people care and make it digestible to my grandfather who might not know what the multiverse is.
And one of the things that popped into my head when you're watching the last episode, obviously compared to all the other shows, this ends on such a cliffhanger. So at what point did you know this season 2 was happening? And did you have a more definitive ending in mind at any point before that?
And there were, the endings of these things are always sort of in flux. So there were many different versions. It was always important to me to tell a complete story, which I think we did. And we always knew we wanted to propel Loki forward into the MCU. That in fact, that almost felt like the most subversive ending, to not kill Loki for once. And to, it's like, no, this guy's story is going to continue. And then, later on in the process, the stars align. We're going to be fortunate enough to do a season 2. And that's when you could make the choices to do kind of that specific, very TV, great cliffhanger. So, but by and large, we always knew that we wanted to launch Loki forward in the MCU beyond just this season.
And are you coming back for that season, or are you just like, too many projects, man?
I've got a lot going on. I love Loki. We'll see.
Fair enough.
When you're, working on these Marvel projects, like how much are you having to check in on other films like Spider-Man No Way Home? Like, were you consulted at all for that film?
Yeah. I mean, your producing teams are constantly communicating with those producing teams to make sure that you're not, that you're not screwing each other up. I had the benefit on Spider-Man No Way Home. Chris McKenna and Eric Summers wrote that. I was their writer's PA on season 5 of Community. So nice. I can call McKenna and get bullied by him whenever I want, but also say, hey, what the hell are you guys doing? Let me make sure I'm not ruining it. So there's communication, and to the extent that, I think the creative teams themselves, the filmmakers, the writers, whoever can become friendly, it certainly benefits the projects.
I know there was a bit of a release date swap, and Doctor Strange was supposed to come out first, but now Spider-Man will hit theaters first. We know Doctor Strange is confirmed in Spider-Man No Way Home. Just curious, were these sudden changes that had to be made because of the release date swap, or Doctor Strange, how did that affect the story? I mean, there's just so many moving parts. I'm just curious, how you dealt with all that.
Also, the guy with the gun is in view of the camera, so you can tell me too.
I would just say, in 2020 was a chaotic year for many years to this. So that those sorts of things just felt like, sure, why the hell not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you roll with the punches, but and you guys know this, and I've said it many times before. With Marvel, the ethos really is make each movie, each show stand on its own, as its own great story that hopefully, even if you've never seen anything in the MCU, and maybe if you never saw anything again, you'd still sit down and watch that and really fall in love with it. So it's like, yeah, you're beholden to what came before, what's coming after a little bit, but you also get the benefit of getting to work in a vacuum a little.
So when you're working with these actors that have such ownership over the roles that they play, like Tom, like Benedict, do you invite them to collaborate at all while in the writing process, or is that too many cooks in the kitchen at that point?
No, totally. I mean, God, Tom was very involved with Loki, early on. As soon as we had a draft of the pilot, he was reading, and he and I were having meals together, shaping it. I mean, he helped me so much in just finding the voice of the character. I'm a guy from the southeast of the United States. It's like a couple of times he's like, I don't know if Loki would say this. sound a little more like me. Yeah, it's such a collaboration, and then all the way through, these guys, they know the characters better than we ever could because they originated them. Benedict as well, but it was such a collaboration with Benedict on set every day because I was there in London for all of Doctor Strange, and that was such a pleasure working with him, working with Lizzie and that whole cast. Just how can we make these scenes as good as they can possibly be, and how can we make sure that we're staying true to all the amazing years of work these guys have put in building these characters.
I don't know. Maybe Tom would slip in a y'all here and there.
I wrote it in. I'd write it in.
For sure, there's an offbeat vibe throughout Loki that seems pretty consistent with the work you've done on like Rick and Morty. I mean, what was that transition like, going from that particular world of animated mayhem to Loki, and then into the confines of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Like, how much freedom did you have to bring your own style to the MCU?
I had so much freedom. I mean,
Nice.
look at episode 1. That there's the meat of that episode is a 15-page dialogue scene, that's my favorite stuff to write. And I couldn't believe when I turned it in, they were like, "This is great. There should be more," and that I think that's what they were excited about, with my skill set. And with Rick and Morty, I obviously the science fiction of it all helps. Your brain that muscle is really, chiseled from working on Rick and Morty. But I think it was, Harmon always preaches accelerated storytelling. Accelerate the plot, but slow down for the character moments. And that was what I tried to do in Loki. Was I tried to really, and we tried to move through a lot of story over the course of 6 episodes. I think it would have been easy to hunt the variant for 6 episodes, but it was like, no, let's meet the TVA or let's meet Sylvie at the end of episode 2. Let's kill the timekeepers in episode 4. Like, let's not leave stuff on the table. Let's get to the fun stuff and then find the next thing that's fun after it. And so that was a thing that I think I carried from just the pacing of animation, and especially a show as frenetic as Rick and Morty.
Having been drawn into the world of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like, how has that felt? And I guess kind of on a sidebar to that, like, are there any properties you'd love to dip your toes into? And I'm 100% referring to Howard the Duck.
It's been a pleasure and a dream come true, man. I mean, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world working on this stuff and working with these filmmakers, these actors and everything, and just to see the response, people care. It's the stuff that I know if I was a little kid, I would be losing my mind, dressing up, watching, it's like, it'd be the stuff making me want to grow up and write movies. And so to be a part of that is really cool. And especially at a time when we're kind of taking the baton a little bit from, the Infinity Saga, and here we are in phase 4. And it's like, all right, can we run it back after a very successful, for first 10 years, what's next? I like that challenge. And yeah, I mean, what properties, I like doing stuff that's unexpected, finding an unexpected emotionality and humanity and equality, whatever, in a property that maybe you wouldn't expect. And so, but I also like Star Wars. So I'm happy to be working on that little thing.
Speaking of that, not only are you living the dream over at Marvel,
I just segue.
You just messed it up. You just messed it up. We know you're doing living the dream with Marvel. You're also doing, obviously, Kevin Feige's Star Wars film. Have you started, really getting through the drafts on that one? And also, is it a completely original idea? Does it incorporate any existing characters that you can say?
It incorporates space.
I've heard of that.
Huh.
Took some time to crack that.
Mm-hmm.
And is Star Wars just one of the multiverses of the Marvel universe?
That felt like a breakthrough. No, I mean, I've been very wrapped up in Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm.
I was there, and then all of Loki, Doctor Strange, we're obviously in post on that and everything. And so bit by bit, I'm just excited to be working with those guys. And yeah, it's in space.
I see how it is.
Yeah. No, you can't say much about it, but what's like your personal relationship with Star Wars, and like what's it meant to you? And if you had to pick, what are your top 3 Star Wars films outside of the Christmas special, of course?
I mean, what has it meant to me? I mean, I wore out the VHS tapes, obviously. I mean, it's as a kid, it was just a nonstop loop of sitting in my room watching Star Wars straight into Indiana Jones, back to Star Wars, just over and over and over again, and which is kind of almost a derivative set of movies to love, but it was. And so yeah, I mean, it informed, I think, so much of the early stories I told myself was just with my action figures, my G.I. Joes or my Star Wars action figures, just imagining lightsaber battles and stuff and everything, and reading all the books, the courtship of Princess Leia, and being like, what is this? What is this book? Like stuff, like not quite understanding, and just loving it, man. And so, yeah, I love Star Wars. My favorite 3, I mean, Empire is number 1 for me. I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be the original trilogy. And I think 5, 4, 6.
Okay.
5, 4,
that's totally fair.
Probably, I don't know. I switch. I guess I go back and forth on A New Hope and Jedi, because as a kid, Jedi was my favorite by far, because what I remember, my earliest Star Wars memory is Vader saving Luke. Like I can't quite remember the moment I was like, wait, Vader's Luke's dad. What I remember is Vader saving Luke. Mm-hmm. And that ending is so good that might give it number 2. So I don't know. They go back and forth.
Before we let you go, I do want to touch on Heels, because I've seen the first 4. For anyone who's not in the know about it, it's about an independent pro wrestling company. I grew up on pro wrestling, so I've even started to come back to it with some of these non-WWE independent competitors that are starting to gain steam. So it seems like a good time to kind of root for an underground wrestling promotion. I really like what I'm seeing so far, but I guess what's your relationship to wrestling, and how did you come to that project? Was this your baby, or did they approach you for it?
Yeah, that was my baby. The Heels was the script that started my career. And I guess when I wasn't watching Star Wars or indie, it was annoying my parents watching wrestling.
Same.
And I was taken with wrestling from the time I was a very little kid. That was my comic books. That was my like mythology that I was obsessed with. I think it's because it was serialized. I think that's what I responded to, because I grew up in the 90s. It's just like, as a kid, you'd watch like cartoons, you watch Power Rangers, and it used to always bug me. What happened one week would not carry over into the next. And so it felt like there was no real character development, felt like there wasn't stakes, and that drove me crazy. Whereas in wrestling, if a guy turned bad one week, then that was the storyline. Next week, it was an ongoing story. And it's funny to look back and be like, well, that was just my psychosis that eventually made me a writer, being activated. So I loved wrestling so much. And when I was an intern on the very first season of Rick and Morty back in, I guess, 2013, I wrote Heels, kind of just as a fan of pro wrestling. There'd never been a show set in that world. I was watching a lot of Mad Men, and I was like, I want to rip this off and try and do a 1-hour show or something more dramatic. And yeah, so that was the thing. And in that show, we got it set up at Stars, and a couple years later, I ordered a writer's room, and I ran that, and we wrote a good chunk of the first season, but it just never quite came together casting wise and everything. And so it went on a shelf. And then 2 years later, when I was doing Loki, it came back together, and we brought on the showrunner, Mike O'Malley. And they, so I had to kind of like let him out of the nest, or what, I don't know what the metaphor is, but it's amazing that it got made, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, I know Stephen Amell is a huge wrestling fan. Has he been really hands-on in the creative process at all, or did he come on just because he saw and he was like, this is
totally? I mean, he was so stoked. It's like, so the stars just aligned that Arrow had ended. Stars wanted to revive the show, and it was right up his alley, and it's Steven's amazing, and it's a chance for him to, you know, really show what he can do in an even greater dramatic level than I think what he got to do on Arrow. And he's a hell of an actor.
Yeah, he's doing a great job so far. The first 4, like I said, are really promising. But I don't want to keep you too long. I know you got to get going. I do want to thank you for stopping by and talking about, you know, Marvel past, present, and future, and Star Wars and Heels, which hits stars on August 15th. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. This was great.